just edit that bit out. Thank God. And we're here, Gordon Dundas.
Hey, how are you?
Good. I'm just trying to, you know how it is, trying to put the wires in to get the aerial up in the roof to connect with you, so it all works.
Unbelievable. The world of modern technology.
Well, welcome to the episode 10 of Series 3. Welcome to those listening on iTunes, to Spotify, and also those watching on YouTube. And Gordon, we've had over 1,200 downloads on YouTube.
Unbelievable. I still believe. Am I not correct in saying, Gordon, that the people still prefer to listen to us, which probably tells you a bit about the visual impact that we have.
I'm just trying to get the bags away under my eyes when I realise. But we just throw it on YouTube because sometimes you hold up things to camera and it's nice to see the guests. I know podcast is about listening, but if you listen, you can go back and see. Coming up, you will be able to see Laura Burt, our chef extraordinaire from Turn Up the Beet, Gordon, who's taking part in the brand new challenge, Drink, Cook, Pair. I gave Laura, a wonderful chef, 3 whiskies. She's had to drink one, cook with one, and pair one with some food.
Oh, fabulous.
So that's coming up later on.
Excellent. So, looking forward to that.
Gordon, as is your wont, every week we look at the news and maybe drink some whiskey. What do you fancy? What do you want to do first?
Well, let's start with the whiskey.
Oh, right. What you got?
I have, it's Feis Ile week. It's Islay Whisky Festival, that other 2 big whiskey festivals in Scotland every year. Spirit of Speyside, which we've just done about 2 or 3 weeks ago with Tamdhu. And now it's the land of the peated monsters, the land of peat, Islay. What an amazing whiskey festival that is. I've done it many, many times. So they're doing virtual whiskey festival. The reason it's a little bit different to what was done for Spirit of Speyside is every distillery has their own day. So, there's quite a lot of, I'm just having a look at the program, but I mean, it starts tomorrow. And then
the 27th of May. Sorry to interrupt, Gordon, just in case you're listening, it's on demand. 27th of May, 2021.
Yeah, and it runs all the way through until Sunday, the 6th of June, which is actually Jura Day. So every distillery has its own day. And so you can see all that detail. And there's lots of tours and lots of things done by every distillery. And it'll be a really, really good fun. So, so I am drinking a Smokehead, which is our Islay whiskey. Of course, we don't get involved in Feis Ile because Smokehead obviously is we're not a distillery, we're a brand, but it's a great whiskey to enjoy around this time because it's Feis Ile time.
Feis Ile time. I want to ask you more about your involvement there, but I will be drinking. Can I just say, I put out a phone call to my electrician mate, Davey. I said, Davey, I'm always looking for something different. He's got loads of whiskies. So he brought me down a Dalwhinnie Winter's Gold, Glenlivet Little Founder's Reserve, nice. A Glenfarclas 25.
Oh, very nice.
But more importantly, a Caol Ila 12. So their day is on Monday. The Caol Ila will be doing their virtual tour and content on Monday, which will be the 29th. Is that the 1st of June? Goodness.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there's a whole load of tastings being done. So you're going to see Ewan Gunn, good friend of mine, will be doing stuff for Caol Ila on and Lagavulin, so he'll be there on Saturday and the Monday. Then the 2 brands I used to work for over there are on Tuesday and Wednesday next week, which is Lefroy. John Campbell, we've had, of course, on the podcast in the first series, and then a whiskey very close to my heart, Bowmore, is on the Wednesday. So I would imagine David Turner will be doing stuff for that, and then there's Kilhoman, Bunnahabhain, Ardbeg, finishing with Jura, which, of course, is not actually on Islay.
It sounds like I have to confess, I've never been to the festival. But it is, I mean, Gordon, outline your involvement when you were doing the festival. What kind of things were you doing to give us a flavour of what went on? And could you explain some of these bottlings, these special editions, which I have spoke to people, and there's one chap it doesn't live far from me. I may have mentioned this on the podcast, whose wife at a concert turned round to me and say, tell him how much you spent. And the husband said, 13,000. And that said, that's not unusual. So the wife knew he'd spent 13 grand at the Feis Ile on a 2 a.m. He said, I'd spent 13 grand by daybreak, you know. So,
yeah, look, I mean, so yeah, every in a normal world, every distillery has their day. So there will be events and, you know, tastings in the, you know, all around the distillery, and there'll be entertainment and food and you know, and then you go on to the next day and it'll be slightly different. Every distillery does it a little bit different. But I think what's amazing about it is that if you think, I think there's about 3,000 people that live on Islay normally. During Feis Ile, it's over 10,000. So there's people camping everywhere. There's not a room to be had anywhere. And it really is an amazing. And the last 2 or 3 years I did it, the weather was phenomenal as well. I mean, baking hot. I mean, you know,
wonderful.
And you know what was great about it from a perspective of a, you know, being a brand, a distillery over there, was that you put these events on actually in the distillery, which doesn't actually happen if you think about it. What we do very often, you don't get big events at the distillery. So I was doing tastings in the malt barns, for example, at Bowmore, where I actually was. We were focusing on the travel retail range. So I was dressed up as a captain, and I mean, it was a complete laugh, but it went very, very well. The other thing we did was a very interesting nosing and blindfold exercise, which really takes people out their comfort zone. And then we had another, you know, David Turner was doing tastings in the number one, you know, warehouse, did a tasting one year with John Campbell in the warehouse at Lafroig, which was just incredible.
Wow.
And, you know, 80 odd people there. Fabulous, you know, and every distillery does it a little bit different. But, you know, you see so many friends, you see, you know, so many people from other brands as well, which is really nice. And it's such a social, it's a bit like Spirit of Speyside, so social. Yeah. Yeah, you have a few drams. You can have a few drams. It's you do come off the island going, you know, you're a little bit like, that was amazing. But I mean, it's a fabulous thing, and we hope it comes back next year to the full whack of normal. But I mean, you know, both these festivals, whether it's in Speyside or whether it's on Islay, are fantastic reasons on their own to come to Scotland if you like a bit of whiskey. And Feis Ile is a pilgrimage for many, many people, as is Speyside. So, yeah, I mean, I've done some amazing things, not just at those distilleries, but around the others. And
I bet you have. Just as an airline captain, that's what we want to listen to.
I miss not going to Islay. I really miss it.
Yeah.
And when I can go, I will be back. And I would I would be going to Feis Ile. So the other funny thing about it was that it always used to be just after a sailing event that I used to do in Tarbert, which for anybody who knows how you get to Islay on a car from sort of Glasgow, you drive through Tarbert, and then you're nearly Kennakraig's a few miles further on. You get the ferry for 2 hours or 2.5 hours over to Port Ascaig or Port Ellen or whichever one you. But I've been doing this sailing event for 3 or 4 days, so I think the best phrase would be to say potentially over refreshed, and a little bit lacking in sleep, because and I used to then go to Islay a little bit like, oh, but you get into it and you're like, oh, and it's just a fabulous couple of days. So and
these collectors, these bottlings that people queue up middle of the night.
Well, I mean, I think probably Bowmore has the precedent on that in terms of, yeah, they release a couple of bottlings. A bit like, look, it happened with Tamdhu this year. You know, we sold our Tamdhu Dalby Alley out in our first allocation in about 3 hours. So, you know, it's pretty similar, but the main difference is people are actually there. And we, you know, so what you see is you see people queuing overnight at Bowmore. It's almost a tradition now. And they queue, you know, out the gate, and you're sort of like to buy. They do a bottle at £300. They do one at 60 and one at 100. They may do three, and people are, you know, They are,
Oh,
but
yes.
they want to buy it. Unfortunately, some are just there to flip it. But you know, that's and so Bowmore probably is the most famous, you know, one in terms of the bottlings. But all of them do them. All of them sell out. Bruichladdich sell out. You know, they do an Octomore or Port Charlotte or whatever it may be. There's always a Carchus from Lafroig, which is incredible. The Kilchoman guys do a great bottling, really strong following. You know, there's not a distillery on Islay that doesn't have a strong following, let's be honest. So I think the only ones who probably couldn't do anything at the moment is Ardnahoe, because they don't have any whiskey. So that's pretty much how it works. And yeah, hugely popular, hugely popular.
Wow. And if you've been, and if you want to get in touch, we have a couple of comments on our Facebook page. I'm having difficulty communicating through Podbean, where we host the audio, Gordon, because they want to download an app and blah, blah. So thank you for getting in touch. But we've got a Facebook page, which I know a few of you have contacted us through. So yeah, I'd love to hear some of the stories of Feis Ile. And I remember, without giving too much of the game away, some German lads coming to Glengoyne after the festival. So they wanted more. And they were laden down with bottlings from the festival. And they asked if they could send it over to Germany, back to Germany. And I don't think I'm giving any secrets away. I'm not going to tell you who they were, where it was. But I think it was about £45,000 worth of whiskey that had to be insured for to send it by courier back to that's the kind of, and they were back at Glengoyne to do a tour. So they love the smoke and the non-smoke. But can I say?
Yeah.
Carry on.
No, I was just going to say the other thing is also at the front end of Feis Ile. So generally at the beginning of the week before or the weekend before is the Campbelltown sort of puts on a little bit of a whiskey festival, or a sort of, so that you can go there, and because it sort of makes sense if you're heading out to Islay, then you just drive 45 minutes further down the road and you're in Campbelltown. So might be an hour, but so yeah, I mean it's a complete sort of journey experience for a lot of people. Fabulous, and you know, it's that and the Spirit of Speyside really are fantastic. You know,
I like the history, and we'll maybe get no time to get into it today, but you have to look at, I think the Spirit of Speyside was 1999 it started, and really the rise of the single malts, you know, already was underway, but my goodness, 10 years hence, with these festivals and then all the people in social media going right, it really has had attraction. It surely has had an influence on how single malts have been perceived.
Absolutely, and not just that. I mean, I have to also say, because I used not because it's anything that I did, but I think, you know, the rise of whiskey festivals generally, and what I mean by that are the events that we have all been to around the world, but. You know, I remember putting on, when I was working in my early years in whiskey, so 2004, 2005, we put on a whiskey show in a tent in George Square. And it was one of the most terrifying experiences you could do. So if anybody knows George Square in Glasgow, great event space, surrounded by busy traffic, basically. So putting on a whiskey event in a square where people are drinking whiskey and you're surrounded by roads and is quite scary, but something like that, and you look back on it now and you forget having 3,000 people at a whiskey show in George Square where they're doing coopering. Glenfiddich were doing coopering, and there was, you know, food, and this was 15, nearly 20 years ago. These things have an impact as well, and so whiskey lives, whiskey festivals are really, there's a huge, and brands themselves, but you know, there's nothing like going to the geography, the location. And when you go to Islay, like when you go to Speyside or Tamdhu or whichever your favorite whiskey is, when you go there, you go to Glengoyne and you drink a Glengoyne and you hear the story, you get it, you understand it, you get it, and you really understand why this whiskey's been, you know, has this sort of style and flavor, and why Lafroig is different to, you know, Ardbeg and different to the others, and it's for sure Caol Ila, for example. So you know, nothing beats going to a distillery, but whiskey festivals have done a huge job for them as well. And
that's a fine whiskey, that Caol Ila 12. I have to say, lovely oiliness, lovely oily, and that's a lovely warm peppery finish as well. So Caol Ila 12 is wonderful. So we have no script for this episode, and we thought we'll just have a quick chat about, I don't know how long we're in, but the other bit of the news, having a wee look at this week, is the mighty Brora distillery in Sutherlands has opened, and the lost distillery is no more lost. It's now
fabulous. I mean, you look at Brora, you look at what's going on with certain other lost distilleries. There's one that, what's the other one that we're involved in?
I've not talked about Rosebank much.
Rosebank,
but yes,
no. Yeah,
it's amazing. So these are, and my question to you, Gordon, would be, A, discuss Brora, but B, the reason it shut in 83, Rosebank shut in 93, was overproduction, maybe underinvestment, not enough interest. How do Diageo and how do Ian MacLeod feel about reopening these distilleries now?
Well, I mean, if we look at Brora, had a very distinctive style, as does Rosebank in a very different way, as does Port Ellen in a very different way. But I think the problem was, if you look at that sort of time in the 80s and the 90s, whiskey was a bit in the doldrums. It didn't really know its audience. It didn't really know what it was trying to do globally. We're in a very different position now. Now, I'm a big fan of all these new distilleries opening up, not just in Scotland, but around the world. We spoke to, Cardrona, for example, in New Zealand, who are doing some really interesting things, and so many other. And in Scotland, you look at Arbickie, you look at Kingsbarns, you look at Ardnahoe, you look at all these kind of guys who are doing some really interesting things around Scotland. And you're like, this is an industry that has got so much momentum behind it now. So, to whether you're Ian MacLeod or Diageo or whoever, and you are bringing effectively back famous names in the world of whiskey that were closed because of the situation, then it gives you huge confidence. Because if you think about it, Rosebank, Brora, Port Ellen, these are three of the most famous names in whiskey. They have real provenance, they have real history, and they have distinctive styles as well. So when you bring something like that back, it's going to really slot in with this momentum behind the industry, because you're going to appeal not just to people who remember Broras and Rosebanks and whatever, but you're going to appeal to a newer audience as well. And that's the exciting point about these distilleries coming back. And I'm really excited about what's going on in whiskey generally. If I'm honest, I think there is a lot of new distilleries coming through. And if you look at, and there has been for 3 or 4 to 5 years now in Scotland particularly, but also around the world, and it just can't keep continuing on.
It's my question. Yeah, can they all survive?
Well, I don't know is the answer, but I think you will see some consolidation. I think you will see, some of the smaller guys who are doing some interesting things probably being bought by bigger guys. That's what happens. That's the way it is. And whether that's because of money or whether it's because of ambition or because of whatever, I think you'll see that in the coming years. But there's never been so much choice for the consumer. But Rosebanks and Broras and these kind of things bring back, for me, really distinctive styles of single malt, which are not there as much now. So it's exciting because it's adding to that sphere of tastes within single malt, and not just single malt, but whiskey, and so, if you were to look at what a typical lowland whiskey is, a lot of people would talk about Auchentoshan, which is a great whiskey, but Rosebank had a unique style because of how it was made. Brora as well, and Port Ellen, of course. Absolutely. So it's an exciting time, really exciting time.
Just as we've mentioned the festivals, they were not around in the 80s and the early 90s when these places closed and people were looking elsewhere for their spirit, drink and fun. Now it's a different landscape, as you've mentioned. So you've
got to remember, back in the 80s and 90s, single malt was driven by the demand for blend. It was not driven by the demand for single malt. It was driven by the demand for blend. Now you have brands that are solely driven by the demand for the single malt. They don't produce whiskey for blends. Glengoyne, prime example. We pretty much, everything we produce now is pretty much just for our brand. And that's changed since we purchased it. It's gone like that. We're producing much more now for our brand than we are doing for blends. And these are contractual things, but there is, and that's why you're seeing more distilleries focusing on their brands much more than the sort of the sort of secondary market, as it were, the blending market. But that
I think people come to the whiskey world. I don't think they realise that that's how it's relatively young. You're talking about the mid 1980s. I had shoulder pads and a moustache. I was walking about the streets in those days. Single malt really wasn't part of my agenda, and it's still quite a young category.
Absolutely, if you compare it, look, single malt. I mean, as a modern day category, I think you can really look to the last 30 years and see the rise of single malt. Yes, it was around beforehand, but never to the percentage. And you look at now in the last probably even 10 years, how much more single malt in the overall scope of Scotch whiskey is taking volume. Its volume percentage is increasing. So, it's probably 12 or 13% now of global Scotch whiskey sales by volume, but by value it's 25 or 30%.
Yeah.
So you can see where the demand is, if you know what I mean. But that doesn't mean that blends are not important, because they absolutely are. And I can see in the coming years the rise of blends again, because I think what's coming through here is that if whiskey tastes great, however it's made, then just drink it and enjoy it. And blends are can be great whiskies. And blended malt, don't forget, blended malt will become something which is really, really interesting, because blending malts together is an obvious thing to do. We do one which I think is fabulous. I know you do as well. 6 Isles. Why would you not want to blend 6 single malts from 6 different islands together? Is there another whiskey like that in the world?
Nope. That's absolutely wonderful. That was a highlight of one of the episodes in the podcast. It was drinking the 6 Isles. Absolutely fantastic. So, and I think, Gordon, we'll maybe move on from this, but it's very interesting as the new single malt distilleries come online and advertise themselves as non-age statements, and it is all about flavour, which is a great thing. The blenders are sitting there and saying, we're doing the same thing. We're, not necessarily talking about age statement, we're all about flavour as well. And as you say, it's starting to blur a little bit of the lines going forward. So it's an interesting developments there.
I think the consumer who buys whiskey is less focused now than they ever have been on whether an age statement is important or not. I think because of what the industry's doing, whiskey festivals are doing, and the ability of people to taste whiskey now more and more, people will buy a whiskey if they like it and the price is right, irrespective of whether there's an age on it or not. And I think that's a big point.
That's interesting. And I guess it's up to the single malt distilleries to, as you say, get the provenance, get the brand, get them in the market, so you have loyalty from people, rather than going just to get any flavour out there. You want to buy from individual distillery. Gordon, it's a great subject. We've talked a lot about that. Can I move on? I have a little section here that you said I don't want to know.
Section.
I don't want to know, because I love little sections. It's a magazine show as well. That's a lovely bit of news and a lovely bit of tasting. But just as the world is opening up and we are beginning to see shoots of freedom in countries, you've mentioned it already. I just thought if we could do it's almost like a bluffer's guide, or we used to call it Gordon Dundassey's listillery. Not distillery, but a listillery to themed whiskey tastings. You are allowed X amount of people indoors now in certain parts of the country or abroad, so you can have small gatherings of whiskey enthusiasts. Now, I would like you, and this is totally random off the top of your head, to come up with some themed whiskey tasting ideas. Now, this comes from a couple of things. Steve Laidlaw, how you doing, Steve? Wrote to the Facebook page, and just said he would like us to talk a little bit about the chill filtering and how he would like to do a tasting of a whiskey from the same distillery that had been chill filtered than hadn't been chill filtered. And I thought, that's an interesting theme for a whiskey tasting. We've talked about lost distilleries. So I'm going to start you off, Gordon. You could have, if you had money, to do a theme night with your friends of lost distilleries. So you taste a Port Ellen, taste a Brora, taste a Rosebank.
There's many of them.
A couple of others that you could put in there. So lost distilleries. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Gordon. The traditional one is by regions, themes, isn't it? So you can outline the traditional one by regions, and then you can go within the same brand. So a couple of thoughts. Gordon and Dassey's Distillery to themed whiskey evenings. Now we're opening up.
Well, I mean, I think if you look at single malt these days, regions are less important than they ever have been, and it's exactly what we were just talking about in terms of you can make different styles of whiskey anywhere now, really, because you get different malt, peated, unpeated, delivered, and your style. Lefroy, if it chose to, could make an unpeated malt, and may well have done in the past. I'm not sure. So you can do that. So I think you have to go. Any whiskey tasting now should be driven by flavor. Should be driven by what it's bringing to you.
Right.
So I'm a great believer of a whiskey tasting that could talk about sherry casks or talk about. But also, I've used blindfolds quite a lot in whiskey tastings. Now, when you are holding the whiskey tasting, that's not bad. When you're one of the people, what you notice is that immediate, and particularly, what I always do at a blindfolded whiskey tasting, which I've done many times, is first I get everybody to put their wallet on the table, so that we obviously have there'll be no wallets left by the end of that, but they're all blindfolded. But what you immediately see, and this is what I really like, is when you take your eyes out of it, your nose becomes much more enhanced, much more aware of what's going on, and you start to hear things much better as well. So a themed whiskey tasting would be a sensory one for me, the first thing I would do. But what I would do is I would give some people some indications of the whiskies that they were going to get, maybe an indication of the maturation, but get people to talk through their nosing. That's one of my favorite ways of engaging people. Other one,
right? Okay.
Yeah, the other.
Oh, another one, Gordon. Could you maybe have a discussion about international whiskey evening?
Absolutely.
What would you do on that one? What comes to mind?
Well, I would love to do I've never done it myself, but I'd love to do an Isle of the South, a Tasmania whiskey tasting of the whiskies in Tasmania. I'd love to do a tasting of New Zealand. We've spoken to Cadrone, as I said, or Omar or Kavalan in Taiwan.
Right.
I've done a lot of Japanese whiskies. I'm a big fan of those as well.
Japanese,
and I think with the new rules coming in behind Japanese whiskey, that's really an interesting change in their dynamic in terms of, at the moment, you can sell Scotch to Japan and bottle it and call it Japanese whiskey. That's going to change. So a Japanese whiskey tasting is actually in the future, in 2-3 years time, will be whiskey made in Japan. The other thing I like to do is also try and broaden people's thoughts. So I remember doing a whiskey tasting where I did some single malts, and I threw a blended whiskey in the middle. And there's a great story of and this is how whiskey tastings can be. There's a great story of a friend of mine who did a tasting, independent guy, did a tasting in Germany, I think, and he was doing a whiskey tasting of just 5 random whiskies, and he told everybody, I think he told them the sort of rough, didn't give away too much information. Middle whiskey was a Black Bowmore, £10,000 worth of whiskey, 42.7% alcohol, legendary whiskey, and under half the room picked it out as their favorite. That sort of shows you that whiskey is all about the individual, but of course people do get led a bit about what you would say. But if I was going to have an amazing, and these are the things you need to think about. If I was going to have an amazing whiskey in a tasting, you should actually put it at the beginning. But you never do, because you want to end on the amazing whiskey.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things and food brings in so much.
You could do a food pairing one.
What about you, Gordon? You've done a lot of tastings. What would you do? You could bring in some theatrical experience, your background.
I do, yes, that's right. Sort of act out some sort of historical moments from those whiskies that you're tasting. But you've mentioned it already. I like the Six Isles. We do one called Sheep Dip as well. So Monkey Shoulders, I think one of the biggest blended malts out there. So you could do a blended malt night and just discuss the components of the malt that goes into each one of these whiskies. So that's quite nice. I think a blended night, you could even do just a blended Scotch night and or a blended whiskey night.
Yeah, I mean, blended whiskey still has a little bit of people go, oh, blended whiskies. I would just point to one whiskey which I used to work with, which dispels any myths about. Hibiki is a blended whiskey that is talked about, and there's no Scotch equivalent, and there's no brand that has nailed an equivalent Scotch to a Hibiki, where it's got this real kudos, great packaging, and is renowned as an amazing whiskey and talked a bit like a single malt, although it's a blend.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a gap in the market there. I'm just going to phone innovation now.
It's fair
right, guys. I think we need a Muck Hibiki.
Well, that's what Compass Box were trying to. They're doing a little bit of blended whiskies and that sort of very good grain, great malt, and combine it with a big thought and try and sell it that way, which was what we used to do in this country. Blends were seen as real.
They've done a lot. They've done a lot. Yeah, Compass Box have been really pushed the boundaries, and there's a lot more things like that. A lot more innovation coming through, which is great. So I think the standard whiskey. Not to mention, I did another one which was really interesting. Was the impact of glassware on whiskey. Now, so we gave everybody a Glencairn glass of whiskey, and then we gave the same whiskey in a tumbler, a half pint glass, and it was really, really interesting to see the results, because we didn't tell them it was the same whiskey. We just said, here's 10 whiskies, but they were all the same, and the difference was unbelievable. And I put that down
on the nose and palate.
Absolutely. And it's incredible. You say, actually, these are all the same whiskies. And it was like, really? And I put it down to a similar thing when you go skiing. I'd love to go skiing. When you go skiing and you get a glass Coke bottle up a ski slope, that is like the best tasting Coca-Cola you ever have. Whereas out of a plastic bottle, it just doesn't taste the same. And so there is that sort of thing going on, or whether you drink tea out of a teacup or a mug. You know what I mean? And there's no doubt there's that impact as well. Will
not take Guinness out of a can. Prefers it in a pub, but at the moment it's only out of the bottles. Absolutely no. Wouldn't even entertain it. But really?
Or another one which you'll be more Iron Brew out of a glass bottle.
Yeah. I know exactly. We'll get blindfold tastings. They've got international. You can go either, Patrick Lutz in the last episode mentioned the Australian whiskey distilleries he'd ordered from. You've got New Zealand, you've got Kavalan and Taiwan. So you can do that. Or a Japanese night. We'll have a food pairing evening, which is
absolutely. I've done some wonderful cheeses. I've also done, we did a Smokehead tasting earlier this year virtually, where we did it was brilliant, because Smokehead's that brand that's a little bit different. It was for the trade, but we did an alternative Burns night where we gave some crisps, and there was some haggis flavored crisps, and there was some just to do things a little bit differently, and the feedback was fabulous.
Great fun. And can I just say, on the food pairing last night, this is completely irrelevant to what we've been talking about, but because it was midweek, I thought we'd just go for some fish and chips, and I overindulged in the fish. I accidentally ordered 2 fish with the chips, and then some of my daughters couldn't eat theirs, so I ate theirs. And so this whiskey right now is really digestifying. It's really making me feel quite good, Gordon. Just feel the bloatiness and bagginess is lifting. So whiskey is a wonderful food to pair with whiskey, but even after food, what a great digestive it is.
Absolutely, so, yeah.
Great. Gordon, I think we're going to just jump off now and listen to our guest. Sadly, you couldn't be there when we interviewed Laura Burt. Now, this was the first of the challenges. Drink, cook, pair. I've mentioned earlier on, you can all become apparent, but it really speaks to the versatility of whiskey. which we've just talked about there.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's cooking with it, because there's lots of recipes now. You can fold whiskey in with food and make lovely dishes that combine food and whiskey, or you can drink it on its own, or you can pair it. So versatility with whiskey, Gordon.
Just
has it always been thus, or are we in a new era of?
We're definitely in a
things?
new era. I think probably in the last 10 years, it's been blown up by exceptionally talented people like we're about to hear from, Laura, or brilliant bartenders and mixologists around the world. You look at the top bars in the world now, most of them are making great whiskey cocktails as a real central pillar to their offering. I mean, I think from my perspective, what we're now doing in the whiskey industry is as wide as it has ever been, and it's down to the people in the approach of the industry and the people who work with the industry. That whole days of don't add water, don't mix anything, don't add ice, drink it, have gone, and good. Because,
well, in my research for this piece, I looked at some of the books.
Have you researched this?
Yes, this part with Laura, not with you.
All right.
This part, lots of books been written about whiskey as a recipe in food, and I was also on YouTube for Woodford Reserve, and their head chef was making some lovely, I don't know if it's some game or some meat, and the lovely raisins were getting rolled with the meat, and they were soaked in Woodford Reserve, and then
Woodford Reserve. I've got a great bottle of Woodford Reserve. Woodford Reserve, I really like it. Triple distilled bourbon. Pot still distilled, I believe. Triple distilled bourbon. Chris Morris, really good guy. But yeah, I mean, and a lot of what you're seeing comes from these smaller distilleries, craft guys, and not that they are, and bourbon historically has always had that link to barbecues and the sort of American, fabulous. But Scotch is catching up now, and we are doing it in a more diverse way, whether it's seafood, cheese, chocolate, steaks, whatever. And it's great.
Here we go, the first installment, and this might be part of our next series, Drink, Cook or Pair. Take it away, it's Laura Burt. I'm delighted, our first guest to play DCP is Laura Burt. Yay! How are you, Laura?
Thanks for having me on. This is brilliant. I'm so excited to be a part of it.
Well, Laura, you come highly recommended. I actually have tasted some of your amazing food, and so when I was trying to work out this game show, I thought, I want to get Laura. I want to get the brains behind Turnip the Beet to come and play. Could you tell us all a little bit about your business? Who is Turnip the Beet? What is it?
Well, Turnip the Beet, it became established about 3.5 years ago, so we're still a wee baby, really. But we're basically existing now as a world cuisine deli on the West Highland Way. We're only about a mile away from Glengoyne Distillery, and we are a catering company as well. So we do bespoke catering, and we also have a small zero waste shop, and we just do eco-friendly take-home meals as well. So we've got a few different forms.
Yes.
Identities.
And highly recommended as well. And just on your website, you have had one or two quite big clients in the corporate world.
We have, the biggest being Glengoyne Distillery. Yeah, no, we've done a lot of different things. The catering has taken us here, there, and everywhere, really. But
Give us a wee flavour. I saw on the website you've got BBC up there, you've got European Athletics up there, Royal Bank of Scotland's. What one sticks out? What one was a good gig? Just gives a flavour of what you do out there.
So we've for the European Championships, we were in the tent at the outdoor swimming events, and we were catering for the BBC crew there. So that was really good to be behind the scenes, just soaking up the atmosphere and making sure everyone was well fed. And then I think probably one of the most unusual things we've done is the food styling on Harry Styles' music video, Adore You. So there's some scenes in that video where you'll see food like a mini taco, or there's a patisserie scene. That's all us. That's all the little Turnip the Beet team behind that.
Believe it, Harry Styles, you must have got quite a shock when you turned on this camera. You must have thought you were back speaking to Harry Styles again. But no, it's okay.
Actually, I did.
It's okay. So that was amazing, because food styling, you know, I've got recipe books in the house there. It's so important, you know, how food looks on the camera. It's not just about eating, it's about conveying how it looks, I would imagine, can be two different things.
Sure. I mean, you must be used to that with the distillery. You've got to do a lot of marketing materials, and it looks like you've done it already there with your little whiskey deck, Gordon.
Correct. And if you're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes, you can go and find us on YouTube, and you can see what I look like, which I'm afraid is not, what Laura looks like, and what Turn Up the Beat looks like, and my whiskey looks like. So that's a nice visual cue. But yeah, I've done a small bit of styling. Would that work?
I definitely noticed that. I'm very impressed.
So Laura, that's great about Turn Up the Beat. Just a little bit before we play Drink, Cook, Pair. Could this take over the nation? I'm not. Your own food journey, where did it begin, and what got you into this whole business in the first place?
Funnily enough, I actually used to work for, I'm sure you'll remember, Gail McCreth, who catered at the distillery. Probably around 16 years ago now. So when I was about the age of 15, 16 years old, I would come up to the distillery with Gail, and we would do her classic salmon with roast potatoes and oats and butter, and serve it to the functions at the distillery. And then from there, I ended up just working my way up from service into the kitchen. And then I went off to France and worked in the chalets, did some training there. Spent a good couple of years in and around France cooking there. And then I moved on to the super yachts, which is where it really all started to take off, where I had some real chefing experience, and I had the joy and the luck of working with some really good chefs and some really exotic places all around the world.
You can't stop there. Come on, I am a Below the Deck fan. So, have you watched them all? And for those that don't know, check Netflix Below Deck, whether it's Caribbean or Mediterranean. So, yeah, just a little insight of where you've gone. Just tantalises us with some of the travels from the past. We miss them.
So lucky. I've been to Dominican Republic, where we swam with humpback whales. I've been out all around the Mediterranean, all around the Caribbean, the States. Very luxurious. Not your usual chef upbringing, just slaving away in the kitchens. It's definitely work hard, play hard.
But my knowledge, and I have got an extensive knowledge of Below Deck, especially Series 1, they're very exacting customers, these people that hire out the super yachts. Would that be right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Very interesting characters. And I have to say, I was trying really hard to not watch Below Deck, and I finally gave in a couple of weeks ago, and I'm totally amazed. It's a really, really accurate representation of yachting. No smoke and mirrors.
That's brilliant. I didn't know, Laura. That's so fascinating. It makes my DCP game seem a little bit inconsequential, which of course it is not. So that's a wonderful summation of your past. So unbeknownst to the listeners, I gave you 3 whiskies last week. You weren't in, so I just dropped them off with the Turn Up the Beat elves, and they got the whiskey to you. And that the whole concept of this is just with someone with a food background and you're an expert. What whiskies would you drink? D. What would you cook with? C. And what would you pair with what foods? So drink, cook, or pair. I'm leaving it in your hands, Laura. You're the expert. What did you come up with? And let the people know, what was your first whiskey and just your thought processes. What were you just going to drink?
So with my historical background with Glengoyne, I'm obviously slightly biased. but it is a really lovely whiskey. And I would normally just drink Glengoyne, but I've decided to pair it this time.
Oh, right, so we'll go P first, okay, pair, right.
We'll pair, and actually I've got two Glengoyne Legends. I've got the 10-year-old and the 18, and they are slightly different actually.
Yes.
So I love the 10-year-old is so lovely. And I actually thought there was a few things that came to mind that I thought the 10-year-old would go really well with. And I was going along the lines of, you'll probably have heard a lot of this before, the obvious ones, like I would say was the flapjacks, and it's like that oats and honey and chocolate, Cranachan, raspberry cream.
Yes.
So yeah, I think the ultimate pairing would actually be like with a Cranachan, I think.
Cranachan. And just explain to our international listeners, Cranachan, a lovely Scottish dish.
Yes, a lovely Scottish dish with raspberries.
I'm taking a note here because you're the first contestant. So 10-year-old Cranachan. So carry on. Raspberries, fresh cream.
Questions later with a prize to make sure you're not listening. So fresh raspberries and some fresh whipped cream, and put a little bit of honey and maybe even a bit of vanilla essence through the cream, and some toasted oats. And with you would actually traditionally put a whiskey through it. So I don't know if I'm blurring the lines a little bit here between cook and pair.
That's fine. It's your game. Your sounds wonderful.
With it, that's a win-win situation.
And Cranachan is such a traditional dish, isn't it, in Scotland? That's a lovely one to have. It's almost like an eaten mess. Is that be right for those?
Yeah.
Another name for something similar.
Very traditional, basically Scottish version of an eaten mess, I would say.
I love that. I think that's a great pair. That's good because I love the 10. For me, it's got a lovely clean notes to it, and it really cleanses the palate. When you had the fresh cream and the strawberries, it just sort of cleanses the palate, ready for the next.
You're right.
So I love that for the 10. Carry on. So that is our pair.
Well, so interestingly, I would have also, because I didn't know if these Glengoyne Legends would come in the same category together, although they're different ages.
I gave you one of each just so you can do whatever you want with it, Laura. So you're going to try and pair the 18 as well?
Yes, I think we're bending the rules a wee bit, aren't we, on the first on the first pair. So I think, and I actually had a good chat with a friend of mine about this who's also a chef, and we both agreed that the Glengoyne 18-year-old would go so well with blackberries and honeycomb and all those kind of flavours. But in terms of me representing Turnip the Beet, I have to tell you that this would go perfectly with our chocolate banana bread. A lot of banana in there, and it's got a massive slab of chocolate on the top, and then we put a little bit of sea salt on it, and that would just go so perfectly with the Glengoyne 18-year-old Legends.
Holding it up to camera, that sounds lovely. That chocolate as well, that's a lovely touch. So that's us done the 18. We are pairing with the Glengoyne. You've still got two categories. You've got a drink alone or cook with. So drink, cook, pair.
Okay, so I am going to cook with the Smokehead.
And what are we cooking?
So I'm going to throw a wild one in the works and say a baba ganoush with the Smokehead as a lovely smoky undertone would be delightful, I think.
And for those of us or those not familiar with a baba ganoush, just explain what it is, and also when you're doing that, could you explain, do you think this is sacrilege, putting whiskey into food, or is it something you've heard done, and is it a good thing? So two questions.
I've always found it to be a good thing. but mainly because I've only ever used it in Scottish traditional cooking where it belongs really naturally. But that's why I wanted to give you a wild card, because you'll be so used to all those traditional recipes by now. And baba ganoush is a Middle Eastern dish. In fact, I think we've had it up at the distillery before a few times, Gordon. I'm not sure if there was any left for you though.
Or whether I can remember, I'm not too sure. Some nights at distillery should, what happens there. Anyway, so yes, what's the main flavour profile of the baba ganoush?
So the baba ganoush should be aubergines, and I would normally char grill or smoke the aubergine. And then it'll just go all soft inside, and you can peel the skin off and just put it in a blender with loads of fresh parsley, loads of fresh garlic, even a bit of pomegranate in there, and a squeeze of lemon or lime juice, and then a little dash of Smokehead in it would just give it a really nice, rich, smoky undertone.
Fantastic. That sounds really, really nice. Absolutely salivating here, just thinking of that. So that's lovely. And yeah, it's not sacrilege to use malt whiskey. And that, for those that are maybe not familiar, Smokehead is an Islay single malt. I should have just explained that for folk not keeping up. So that would be a lovely sort of smoky undertone, as you mentioned. So we've got the pear for the 18. We've got the cook with the Smokehead, which means you're tasting and drinking the Tamdhu, which is the Tamdhu 12. Now, flavour, does that remind you of anything from the food worlds? It's entirely matured in sherry casks, the Tamdhu, but lovely, rich flavours there with some, as you've mentioned already, some vanilla and some softer notes.
I'm just having a wee taste.
Good.
It would be really nice. No, I absolutely love the Tamdhu. It's absolutely gorgeous. It reminds me of I took part in the Dramathon up north.
Yes.
That was one of the distilleries that the Dramathon goes past.
That's halfway.
Yeah, that's right, and it's a stunning distillery as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. You'd have crossed the Spey just after Ballindalach and Cragganmore distilleries, and then you run along the side of the Spey, and then you come to Glengoyne. I was doing the half marathon in the first one, and when I saw the dunnage warehouses of Tamdhu, it's almost that poster of Platoon. I was on my knees and my hands in the air. Thank God. So, but you had to carry on. Did you do the whole shooting match?
I got pretty close, and then in true style, I conked out. It's a talent of mine. I do a lot of running, and I get really close to the end, and then I manage to faint. It's just something that I do. I get too excited, but the most important thing is I still got my wee bag of miniatures at the end, which is why we do it, isn't it? That's like the best incentive to run ever.
So it is. It's great fun, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but we started certainly the first one at Glen. Was it Glenlivet we started?
No. Glen Farclas.
Glen Farclas we started, and you finished Glenfiddich.
That's right. Yeah.
And you pass all these distilleries, and they give you miniatures at the ends. So after Tamdhu, you go up the hill to Aberlour, which is a killer, I believe. Thankfully, I didn't do that section, but it's a great race. It's a great part of the world, and what you're holding there, Tamdhu, really does sort of encapsulate that whole area. Speyside's so special.
It really does. It's gorgeous, and I think this is a really well-rounded whiskey. I actually tested this on one of my friends too. She's one of those, she's like, oh, I don't like whiskey, I can't handle whiskey. And she was like, oh, okay, I like it. And I also think the Glengoyne 10 has that exact same effect. These are the whiskies to give to people that think they can't handle a whiskey, and then they drink a Tamdhu 12 or a Glengoyne 10, and they slowly start converting because they're just quite nice, sweet, light whiskies.
So out of all the three things I've just done there, Laura, whether it's been drinking alone, whether it's been cooking it or pairing it with the whiskies, out of the three, which one, if you only had to choose one, would you choose to drink? It doesn't need to be these whiskies, just drink it alone, cook it, or pair it. What's the best in your opinion?
Well, I'm going to have to stick to Glengoyne, I'm sorry, but everyone that knows me knows that that's definitely my favourite drinking whiskey. The 10-year-old, I have to say, is my favourite.
Really nice, very drinkable, and I love your Cranachan, that lovely fresh raspberries and cream, some honey and oats with just all these lovely flavours. You've got that in the glass as well, so it's a great shout. Laura, we can get you on the website, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. You can get us on our Turnip the Beet website, which is www.turnipthebeet.co.uk.
And there's some great photographs of the West Highland Way, and you've sent out your staff and taken some great photographs over the last year of lockdown, which is I thoroughly enjoyed looking at them.
We're lucky where we are, aren't we? And we've definitely made the most of it. We're just in such a lovely area, so the lockdown hasn't been that bad for us, I have to say.
I know. Well, hopefully if people listen to this and they're going to try and come across to Scotland at some point and come to Glengoyne, you're just along the road so people can come and check it out at Turn Up the Beat. Laura Burt, thank you very much. Harry Styles, food stylist, super yacht cook as well. And now the first person to do a drink, cook, pair. You have been sensational. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much. That was lovely.
Slanjava. That's my glass. Well done, Laura. That's Gordon, I'm sure
Fabulous.
you'd have agreed with that, but did you not? Because you've mentioned about yachting and boating and sailing.
Yeah.
Super yachts. She's been a chef in the super yacht, Gordon. Have you ever set your little dinky feet on a super yacht?
I have. I've sailed on a few super yachts. Yeah, I have. I have. I had a friend of mine.
Come on, quickly.
Well, I was in Palma about 3 years ago, and a good friend of mine, Roddy, who's the skipper of a yacht out there. It's a 110-foot Wally. It's called a Wally yacht. This thing is unbelievable. Just a beautiful bit of sailing boats, not so much motorboats. I'm more a sailing boat person. Below decks, watch Below Decks.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So well done to Laura. I think, can we see Drink, Cook, Pair coming up in the next series?
I don't see why not. I think there's a lot of things that I think should come up in the next series. As you may not have guessed, this is going to be the last episode of this series. Gordon, you and I, we're not going to take a break. We're going to be doing lots of other things, but we are taking a short sabbatical. Is that the word? I don't know. Busman's holiday from doing this probably till about mid-July. Would that be fair? We've managed. Fair, I mean, when we started this up, Gordon, we thought, well, let's do a podcast. We've done 40 episodes, something like that.
Something like that. I know. So we've got so many little features I wanted to do, including I've got the answer. What's the question? So will we be doing that again, Gordon? And just as a little soup salt, a little flavour. You've mentioned this distillery already. Here's the answer. Bowmore, 1778 or 1779.
1779. Second oldest distillery in Scotland?
Yes, or the oldest one still working in Islay. Boom. And finally, Brackla in 1835. Brackla in 1835.
Did it get its royal warrant?
What's the question?
Did what? Which whiskey got a royal warrant?
In 18, yes. 35.
35.
Yes. That's William the Fourth.
Very good.
William the Fourth. Anyway, we're working that, and that. Whoa! Hang on, big boy.
I've got some for you. Talking of that, Lefroy in 1994.
Ooh. Which distillery celebrated 150 years of existence?
No.
Oh, it's the bar. Not even the bar. No, Gordon, I give in to that one.
Which Islay distillery received a royal warrant from Prince Charles?
Ah, of course. He filled up a cask when he was there. Is that right?
I think he did. Yeah. He was back there about a year, two or 3 years ago as well. Yeah.
That's nice. So Gordon's got the answer.
Okay,
it's just what the question is.
Here's another question. Speyside with over 55 distilleries.
What is the biggest whisky region in Scotland by distillery?
Correct.
By numbers. Boom. So this is another. Earlier on, we talked about themes for whisky tastings. This could be a theme. Here's the question. What's the answer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to do more of that. More of that. So,
we'll do more of that. And also, I don't have time for objects that changed the course of history. This series, we talked copper, advertising, money, and all sorts of tartan trues to indicate the tourist industry that's now around the world of whisky. So there's more of that. I've got a few up my sleeve. We never got quite round to, Gordon, sadly. And just a quick word on some of the people we've had. Just a big thank you to people like James Campbell, Sandy McIntyre.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Leonard Russell, don't forget the boss.
Don't forget Leonard's.
Absolutely. Look, we couldn't do this without everybody's generous time that they give us.
Sarah Elsom, Ian Burnett, Dougie Wiley, and Danielle Murphy as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Stuart Hendry, Dave Cummings. Yep, that was all. I wanted to mention everybody from this series, so thank you to all them.
Absolutely, and we will be back. So we've got 40 episodes of content on Podbean, on YouTube. Well, not on YouTube, only the last series is on YouTube. But so catch up with it. There's some really, really good stuff there. We'll be back with the same format. We're not going to really change it, but we'll be back in mid-July, I suspect, with some more Whiskey Unscripted.
Yes, there might even be one or two little surprises. We might even be live, out and about.
Ooh.
Who knows? Who knows?
We could be doing it live from different locations. Wouldn't that be exciting? Look, guys, it's been a pleasure. We are here on Facebook and everything. Keep in touch, and we'll see you all soon. Slanjiva.
Gordon Slanjiva, great episode. Thanks. Your health.
Cheers,
folks.
Bye.
Bye. Well, that was the end of a fantastic episode. I hope you enjoyed that. Just a quick word about the musician here, Dave Arcari. He's in the Smokehead sessions starting June the 7th. There's 4 of them that month, 8 o'clock. Head to Dave's Facebook page or his website, Dave Arcari. Thanks for the music, Dave, and have a great June with those sessions. Everyone, goodbye.
Doing it this way since 1833, staying ahead on the whiskey trail. Oh, staying ahead on the whiskey trail.